Good afternoon, and thank you for making the time out of your busy schedule to attend this webinette, the U of A Strategic Plan for EDI and Your Teaching Practice, webinette number 6, Equality-Substansive. Our webinar today is collaboratively facilitated by Dr. Donald Mason and I. Donald, please introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Everett. My name is Don Mason, and I'm director of the English Language School.
Thank you, Donald. I am Everett Igobwa, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. My role at CTL is Lead Educational Developer, Critical Pedagogies and EDI. The webinar will be about 15 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. Please submit your questions via the link in the chat, and you can additionally post your questions in the chat or ask them in person after the presentation. The University of Alberta respectfully acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. I will read out the access check adapted from the University of Toronto. For transparency, we understand access to be a shared responsibility between everyone in this space. Our goal is to strive for an inclusive and accessible space that reduces the need for anyone to unwillingly disclose a disability or impairment for the purposes of gaining an accommodation. We want to be mindful about distinguishing between formal accommodations, itself sometimes a difficult process to navigate, and access needs, which we all bring to our spaces from a variety of social locations. In doing this work together, we strive to welcome disability and the changes it brings into our space. If you have an access need that we have not addressed, or you notice a barrier that doesn't directly impact your engagement, but may impact that of others, please feel free to bring it to our attention via whatever channel you prefer. This is webinar number 6 in a series of 8. Webinar number 1 was equity, number 2, diversity, number 3, inclusivity, number 4, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and number 5, accessibility. And the videos are on our CTL YouTube channel. Please review them, as these 5 EDI concepts are closely related with the 2 remaining EDI principles, human rights and intersectionality. During this webinar, I will outline the 8 principles of the EDI strategic plan. Additionally, Dr. Donald Mason will discuss equality-substansive as it impacts learning and teaching. Our EDI strategic plan is guided by 8 principles: equality-substantive, intersectionality, accessibility, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, human rights, inclusion, equity, and diversity. Equality is fair and just conditions in teaching and learning to allow students to realize their full potential. Diversity means multiple identities of students in our classrooms. Inclusion is valuing and nurturing the ideas, thoughts, perspectives, backgrounds, and identities of students. Human rights are fundamental rights in the classroom to be and belong as who we each are as whole people. Equality-substantive means consciously addressing the range of conditions that deny equity to individual students and student demographics in the classroom. Conditions that create opportunities for identified disadvantaged students in the classroom. Intersectionality is the way that individual axes of oppression compound and interweave in who each person is in the classroom, and how these axes never exist separate from each other but always interlocked. Accessibility is physical, pedagogical, and administrative structures designed, and designed and redesigned to foster, facilitate, and empower students' success. Reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples means beginning in truth and moving toward the building and sustaining of respectful, responsible, and ethical relationships with Indigenous peoples and all those living across the nation we now call Canada. An example that comes to mind regarding Equality-Substansive is the ELITE program, the acronym for Experiential Learning in Innovation, Technology, and Entrepreneurship for Black youth ages 15 to 19, to create opportunities for them to access experiential learning and work integrated training in STEM fields and entrepreneurship. That said, I now welcome Dr. Donald Mason to offer an example of Equality-Substansive from the English Language School. Over to you, Donald.
Thanks, Everett. If you can go to the next slide, that would be great. So I just wanted to say that we were working on a project some months ago, and I was looking at the EDI strategic plan to see how we could be supported in this project. I read through the equality-substantive definition and came to Everett to talk it through to look for practical ways to apply this. But let's look quickly at the definition. The University of Alberta embraces a substantive to equality. This means that achieving equality is not a matter of treating like alike, but also requires us to consider and to address the range of conditions that create experiences of disadvantages for some individuals and groups. Next slide, please. We consider the full context and impact of our practices and processes, recognizing that these may be experienced differently by different groups, individuals, or groups. Substantive equality, then, is a quality that is real, impactful, and meaningful. Again, we need to consider and address conditions that create disadvantage. The project that we were working on involved a comparative studies of international and domestic students' GPAs. And we were looking specifically at students who were required to withdraw or were within the required to withdraw range in their first year of study. We compared domestic students, bridging program students, and international direct entry students. Domestic students in their first year of study are required to withdraw at a rate of 9.3% in their first year of study. Bridging program students, students who have not yet met the language requirements for the university, so are still working on their language, when they enter into their first year, they are required to withdraw at a rate of 10.9% in their first year. I'm just going to skip to the last one, which is international direct entry students whose first language is not English, are required to withdraw at a rate of 20.7% in their first year of study. So again, that is 1 out of 5 students is in that range of having to withdraw in their first year of study. Huge differences there. So what I wanted to say is that by going through this type of, gathering this type of data clearly identifies a disadvantaged group and helps motivate you to understand and the conditions that lead to disadvantage and to try to find practical solutions for that. Having clear data then, when working with a group, is crucial in providing direction and motivation for change. In this instance, we carried out 3 separate GPA studies, as well as numerous consultations across faculties to come to a clear understanding of the types of disadvantages that this particular group was facing. In this case, it led to the creation of a new course called Academic and Intercultural Communications. And this has been designed specifically to meet the needs of first-year direct entry international students to help them successfully transition to their studies. Is not so much the course that we want to talk about today, but some of the things that we thought about as we were doing this. The group of students we're looking to support then is widely diverse. They have different skill sets, different living situations, different cultural and educational backgrounds, and different levels of preparation. There are many things to consider here, and we wanted to focus on some of the shared conditions that create disadvantage for this group. For many students arriving for their first year in Edmonton, whether they're coming from Saskatchewan or they're coming from international situations, they often arrive a week or so before classes begin, and there's very, very little period of adjustment. Everything, in essence, is high stakes from the outset. International students in this way are disadvantaged from the start. Students are often unclear about expectations. Instructional styles are new to them. Assessments are new to them and different. Everything is new, and in many ways, they often feel like there's no one to ask. Going back to our study quickly, we see this very clearly in the comparison of bridging program students who come in with lower language scores and yet who do better than international direct entry students who come in with higher language scores, but go directly into their studies and stumble often in many cases. So what we are doing with this course is providing that period of adjustment and academic acculturation so that students are better prepared for their studies in their first year. I think this is worth thinking about from different aspects of campus and the programs that we have and how quickly or how well we prepare students for their studies. I think it's worth thinking about recognizing that many students do need to make major adjustments as they come in. Just thinking through our students obviously come from widely diverse backgrounds. And one of the things that I was thinking about, and doesn't come as a surprise perhaps, but when there are no shared experiences for students, those who don't have those shared experiences are very much at a disadvantage in some ways. And this can come out in many different ways in the classroom. One way that we see very often in language classes is if there is one dominant linguistic group in the classroom, when they come to a break or when they have a time to just chat, that dominant group will often go into their first language, which is natural. But anybody who is not part of that dominant group is clearly excluded. And you see their faces drop as they suddenly realize, hey, they're not talking to me anymore. And so one of the things that we do is really just talk to students about being inclusive in the classroom and sharing that responsibility. And students generally respond very well to that and work to include the others back into that group. So I think that that's a consideration in all classrooms. One thing I wanted to talk about is something we're very familiar with, I think, when we're dealing with international students, but students who have a lack of familiarity with cultural references. We often assume a lot of things in the classroom, I think. I want to give you an example, and it may be a bit of an extreme example because it occurred during a midterm exam. But on this exam, there was a math question, and the question involved a puck and a crossbar and a rebound. And for some students in the class, they were clearly mystified by what was going on with this question. International students, some of them didn't know what a puck was, and just really did not have the cultural references for understanding this. For Canadian students who've grown up in Canada, that would probably be a fairly familiar situation. But for those international students who were trying to take that test, many of them didn't understand. And the professor actually had to stop the exam, explain the question, and give them time to then go back and write it. So that's an extreme situation because it's in an exam situation, but we use cultural references all the time, and thinking about how we use them and how they can be exclusive to a group, how they can exclude people from understanding, makes us think maybe we should sometimes provide more explanations there. Maybe we need to think about different perspectives, different cultural references, which we can use that can widen the understanding or broaden it to different groups. So I think it's just something to think about again for the classroom. One of the things that came up many times in speaking with different groups on campus about the international students was the lack of confidence they often met, particularly in first year, and particularly around not asking questions. And there's many confidence factors, I think, that we're considering in building this course. But one of the questions was around the question of using the importance of naming, of using names. And I've put in the chat box a link to an article on universal design for belonging. That article I found very useful in a number of different ways, as it gives strategies for how to work around how to make sure that you are using names and giving strategies for you to be inclusive, and to, when you're not sure of how to use that name, how to work through that. And I found it just a really impactful article, so I thought I would include that there. But again, the whole sense of building confidence through personalizing the course, through including students. In terms of really, I think one of the centerpieces of what we're working through is how to build that confidence with students. They need the skill sets, and once they have the skill sets, they can gain that confidence. But there's a lot of things students can be lacking. And with these students, with students coming from elsewhere, often there is a lack of support or support groups. Families, friends, community can be in different places, and so they can be a feeling of isolation. There can be a lack of knowledge about available resources. So thinking about how to acknowledge that there are students in different living situations in your classroom, and to bring resources, to make resources available to them, opens up different support networks for students. So just being, I think, really gaining that awareness and acknowledging different groups in the classroom can be a very positive, confidence building and inclusive way to go. Okay, thank you.